Morning, Jared. How are you?
I'm good. How was the experience? You were either in the crowd or very close to the crowd for both.
Yeah, had to beat both. They proved to be fantastic contests in the lead-in, and they didn't disappoint in my mind, as both vanquished teams had their runs and challenged the ultimate winners. There was enough the atmosphere was through the roof, but there was enough drama in terms of I was sitting in and amongst probably more Hawthorn supporters than Cats supporters on the Friday night. The Hawthorn supporters were bleeding about the umpiring, and it was so, I suppose, unwarranted in some ways. I can see how, like, the emotion. There was a guy that was so quiet behind us. There's two guys behind at Barrack for Hawthorn, and they were so quiet in the lead-in. Asked him how he was feeling. He goes, "I'm really nervous." He didn't get a peep out of him in the first 20 minutes because Hawthorn going well, so don't move, don't talk, don't jinx it. When it started turning sort of in the second quarter, I had to look around to see if this was the same bloke. He lost his mind. Right. He absolutely lost his mind. But look, it's just everything that you want in a game of footy, like without any skin in the game. And I can say that you're able to watch the Saturday game dispassionately in some sense as well. I just thought it was, the crowds were huge. The four teams had a crack. Has to be two winners, two losers, and it just proves to be August to be an awesome game this weekend off the back of what will be unpacking everything in between.
All right, so let's slot the events into our different categories for a Monday. The buck stops for Victoria Police, made for more search police careers.
Yeah, well, the thing that strikes me about both of these teams is how reliant they actually are on their youth, and Brisbane more so for me. I mean, nine of the least experienced 11 on the field. So there was 11 players who had the least experience. 9 of them were Brisbane players on Saturday afternoon. Ned Long and Roan Steele, the only two that were in there in terms of games played. So, the Brisbane players, and that included 5 premiership players, mind you, in that 9 for the Brisbane. But we saw what Gallup was able to do. Reville comes in and plays his role on the wing. He's just strong and tough and clean. He's a really good kick, underrated user in terms when he finds time and space. Really good decision maker. Young Marshall, that was his 9th game, I think, 9th or 10th game of footy. He ran around he picked up 17 touches, really clean. The thing that stands out with me with both of these teams that we'll see come to fruition is just how clean they are inside and how the over-the-top handball invariably always goes to advantage. But these young players were playing their roles in that and doing it really well. Levi Ashcroft hasn't missed a beat in his first year. And then I'm going to steal a couple out of the over the 50, sort of Morris, who's just a class player. Whether it's taking a contested mark when you need it most. His player cannot switch off for 1 second. He needs a really good defender on him all the time because he will hurt you if you don't switch, if you don't get that right. And then Lohman, who 17 disposals, in his role is his ability to be able to win the ball and then look dangerous and damaging at different times. So there's a half a dozen for Brisbane. Then you go to the Geelong side. Clark's role was put on a pedestal by his coach to come in after the Stewart departure. He missed a couple of kicks, and that's the knock on him. But, geez, he gives you plenty on the other side, some ground balls that he just needed to stay over and did really well. The work rate to get up and back, the connection with his teammates despite sort of not knowing whether you're going to come in. He plays that sub-role really well. Humphries is just class. You have a look at the impact that Mullen's having. His commitment, his discipline, dedication, speed, knocked over McCluggage, knocks over Watson. Watson has to go back as a small defender ultimately. Manor, who I reckon is as damaging as anyone. Shannon Neal, who the matchup with Barras, very different to a matchup with Andrews, and we can unpack that if we've got time. O'Sullivan was well beaten by Lewis early, but then went and did the job on Chol when swapped with De Koning. So there was some switches made, but some youth that were relied upon. So look, have a look at that. They're all under 50 game players or just over the top, and having significant roles in hardened, experienced teams that are playing finals footy and not letting up. You know, not when they have a bad moment, it's here or there, but it's not due to team cohesion or the individuals within it, which is quite phenomenal.
The under 50s, the buck stops. Gallup has grown into the Hipwood role across the past 6 quarters really well.
He has, and I mean, there was he'd only played, in his first couple of games, I think there was a chase down tackle. It was I think it might have been the Hawthorn game. And his effort and his work rate and his want to compete was really good from the get-go. And he's talking to John O'Brien about this year. Well, I didn't get a touch in my first 10 games. Like, I did not touch the ball. And in a year in, I think everyone had reason to believe that what's this young bloke going to become? Is he going to make it? And we know where Brownie ended up. Ty Gallup has big shoulders. He's a big boy. He worked really hard defensively. So when he wasn't impacting offensively, he was still prepared to, when the ball hit the ground, to go and hunt the ball or the opposition player with the ball. So that was a really good sign early. What he's been able to do aerially in the last 2 weeks was obviously what he was brought into the side for. Six games of footy, 5 games of footy. Are you serious? Yeah, and he kicks 3 goals, kicks them, takes a mark when it matters, finishes when it matters. Everyone wants to Ty Gallup now, don't they?
They do. The big issue for Oldham construction lawyers, you're experts in construction law, so I think this is the heart of the champion. This is the Brisbane Lions' performance to make that stand and qualify for a 3rd consecutive grand final.
Yeah, I thought they were challenged in the second quarter, and they were able to find a way. I just think that their ability to get numbers to the contest, to be clean and hard, to run and carry, to withstand whatever pressure the opposition put on them, has proven to be, where they separate themselves from other teams. Their hurt factor in terms of their offense off the half back line, the run and carry to go through the midfield, and then their multiple hurt factors in front of the ball. With a Harris Andrews who stands as a beacon behind you to get that done. Darcy Gardner stood up. Leicester, they're journeymen. Gardner and Leicester, they wouldn't. If you saw that, in terms of talent, they're not at the high end level of talent, but they're in the high end level of want and desperation. And they just keep getting it done. So they handled themselves really well, emotively as much as any. And they do seem, as much as Fags is a really level, this is a calm, positive coach, there's no doubt that he feeds into the answering critics or righting a wrong. And there'll be a big part of that in the lead-in against Geelong, given what happened in the qualifying final, because they've done that a couple of times this year. If you look at round 20 against the Gold Coast, they look done by 11 points. That was their poorest performance for the year, and they turned that around. It's a 120-point turnaround in just over a month. Back in round 6, they lost to Collingwood by 52 points. They beat them by 27 points in round 21, and then went 29 points again. So that's an 80-point swing for both of those results. So they won't be worried about a performance against this same opposition a couple of weeks ago, because they'll go to work and they'll believe that they can turn it around, and that'll be exactly the shtick that Fags will use.
So he clearly at halftime, he said in the press conference he used the pain of the defeat in a grand final to Collingwood in 2023, maybe having not used it before. That was his moment to choose it. And his touch, you've been in the sweet spot with the group, is his touch just seems perfect with his group at the moment, and not just for a few weeks, over a long period of time. Yeah, well,
we've spoken about it quite often here, after round 8 against GWS last year, or round 7 or 8, I'll have to speak to the leaders, because that's not us. I can't reconcile that performance. I think it was like 12 goals to zip in after half time or something like that. So he deigns back to his leaders. He goes back to the guts of his team, and he has a lot of experience in that locker room. They have 11 players or 12, depending on what happens with Lachie Neale, that are played over 150 games. That's a lot of football that they've played together now. That's a quite a large nucleus of a team that Chris Fagan has tapped into. He believes in them. They believe in him. And it might only be just a drop of challenge or a little bit of reinforcement, and his group, the leaders of his team, the leaders of the locker room, they pick up and they run with it. So the credit needs to be shared. The coach knows them, and they trust their coach, and that's why they were premiers last year, and it's why they've been in 3 grand finals now in a row, and it's why they'll be a handful on Saturday.
So you referenced Lachie Neale there. What happens with Lachie Neale?
Well, in the end, we just spoke about how much the coach believes in his players and believes in his leaders. He also needs to believe in his staff. It clearly was a pipe dream. It was Lloyd Christmas, and it was $1 million to 1. But Lachie Neale is a fighter. Like he's not going to die wondering. So there's no doubt that he said that, well, I'm only lost if I say that it's done, and I'm not going to say it's done. So he's done everything in his power. I'm not sure what sort of session that he did on Saturday morning, but it sounds like he did quite a solid session. Soft tissue is a question mark. But if Lachie Neale walked to Chris Fagan's office and said, I'm ready to go, put me in, I'd find it pretty hard. I think it'd be very difficult for Chris Fagan not to back him, because that's been his style. But Lachie Neale would be thinking that he needs more information for himself, and I dare say that Chris Fagan would back whatever Lachie Neale says that he's going to be able to do. I don't know what that is yet, and I don't think we can know. I don't think we'll know that until Thursday.
Yes. Injured players play all the time in grand finals, and they are either heroes or it doesn't work.
Yeah, and we only do that in retrospect.
And it's only done in retrospect.
And we'll get to Collingwood and Pendlebury, but that it is done in retrospect. And if it's an early departure from the game, it has a profound impact. Having said that, Jared Berry was relatively late. Tom Stewart was early. Jai Clark comes in, and they do not miss a beat. Collingwood less so. But having said that, they still had 6 goals in a run in the second quarter and went into halftime with all the momentum. So the sub rule changes it. There's no doubt that gives you just a little bit of room to play with.
We run preliminary final integrity. Do you have it or not? PFI. And then when you get to the preliminary final, we ultimately find out Collingwood didn't. And there's a whole lot stitched into that. So here's a couple of the messages, Bucks, as you hit PFI. Nat has texted through, Collingwood had 2 weeks to prepare for the game against Brisbane, and they still managed to completely stuff up every decision. Firstly, as soon as the news Brodie Grundy was battling a dislocated toe, he should have been ruled out, and next day came in. Brodie Mychek. Yes, thank you.
All good.
Pendles should have ruled himself out before the game once he felt calf tightness. Side bottom to McCluggage. What was Fly thinking? And my snap judgment is that if McRae wasn't loved by the media so much, he would be getting whacked for playing Pendlebury. Surely Collingwood have learnt from past mistakes of taking injured players into big finals. Ben Reid, 2011. At his age, with a calf complaint, should be a pretty easy decision not to play him, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he's a good bloke. That's from Ed.
Can we start there?
Let's start there.
So Pendles didn't go into the game with a calf. He had adductor tightness out of the Melbourne game, the last round. So they had 2 weeks into the qualifying final and then 2 weeks in the prelim. So he's had 4 weeks where he's been on lighter duties, and this is Pendles anyway, lighter duties due to an adductor issue in his left leg. So he hasn't done as much training as he normally would. And leading into the qualifying final, had that same issue, didn't do a lot of training, made sure that was fine, and then played and got through the qualifying final, which is a perfect lead in to assuming that you can roll in and do the same into a preliminary final. So the images we saw of I ran into Pendles at the Crown, at a restaurant at Crown last night, incidentally. So the issues that you've got sort of going in are the same. So if you've been able to handle it 2 weeks later, well, then you'd assume that you'd be able to handle it 4 weeks later. So that's what Collingwood did. Went through a run through late in the week. Did the pre-match stuff to make sure that to tick it off. Yep, feel good. That was what the vision of the conversation with the conditioning coach was, or the doc. The leg felt brilliant. Felt so much better than it did going into the qualifying final. Problem is that you do get imbalance, and old guys sort of have these issues at times. And the left leg felt great, but the right leg, he said, it tightened up. 2 minutes into the game, he went to push off. It tightened up and became debilitating. This is the first game in Scott Pendlebury's career that he has not finished due to soft tissue. 420 games of AFL football, and it's the first time that he has ever not been able to complete a game due to soft tissue. He's broken his leg a couple of times. He's had fingers, he's had concussions, etc., etc. But I think it was a fair bet to think that, you know, one of your experienced players who's been there, done that, and been so sound. So the communication or the reporting of it has been a little bit off the mark. Having said that, it wasn't ideal for Collingwood at all.
So they missed him in all sorts of different ways, but at stoppage, where we know that he's the on-field coach, and they got belted at stoppage, particularly in Brisbane's forward 50, where they were able to score routinely there.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of leadership. We've spoken about a lot of it, experience in all of these sides. Geelong have great experience. Brisbane have great experience. Hawthorn probably less so, but Collingwood absolutely. And it's the balance of that you sort of look at. But Pendle's lined up as the highest defender, so we never got a chance to see what that plan was come to fruition. So I think Josh Dacos went back for a period. Maybe he was slated to sort of stay in the midfield for the majority of the piece. Someone's just texted, no one's buying that story. It's not a story, mate. Just pull your head in. I reckon. In terms of the experience of Collingwood, it's deep. It runs deeper than a lot of teams. So you think, okay, where's their half a dozen players that Geelong have got? Where's the half a dozen players that Brisbane have got that are coming up and adding to the mix? Because you've gone so deep with your experience, you probably haven't had as many chances for those young players to come through, and some of them have been injured as well. Harrison's been injured for a lot of it. West was injured late. And will potentially come through. I think they found one in Parker, but there hasn't been room for him as much, or they haven't created room for him as much. So say there's 3 that could potentially come through, and next year definitely will be the time. So list management's going to be an issue in regards of finding space for those young players to come through.
So as we cast our judgments, where did they come up short to your eye? They weren't as hard and clean inside as Brisbane were. I thought that their stoppage failings were quite significant. Like the first Bailey running through a forward 50 stoppage without being checked and bodied, that would definitely come up in review, because that's just that good teams don't allow that. You just do not allow one of the most damaging opposition players, and they've got a few. Let's be honest, but for him to have a clean run through there is something that wouldn't happen. And then Ashcroft sort of wraps into the corridor, and he's able to create something out of nothing with that with the kick out of off the ground. But to allow 4 forward 50 goals and 6 goals from stoppage, I think 5 of them from the front half in that third quarter run. 10 stoppage goals overall, and to be smashed in that area that's a breakdown of how the back 6 operate. And if you remember how Collingwood put that player behind the ball for Adelaide, and it just didn't look like Adelaide could get any yards or penetration out of stoppage. Well, it looked exactly the opposite, and Brisbane were able to equalise, were able to go to work on the ground, and had class finishes everywhere, but they had space to do that. So Collingwood couldn't control the back half of
the ground, and that has been when they've looked the most vulnerable, when opposition get even numbered supply and then can go to work on the ground, and that's where Collingwood were exposed again.
I still feel like the biggest question is what happens if Jamie Elliott leaves? Because he's just had the most magnificent season, and Saturday it was him or bust. He's kicked 60 for the year. He's 33. The background conversation for a couple of months now is that his heart's desire is to go to Gold Coast. Not that's a geographic decision as much as it is a team decision. So we'll know in about the next 3 days, I suspect. But if he does say he's going, then what does Collingwood's forward line look like next year, given it hasn't functioned outside of him this year?
Yeah, I think my check was obviously heavily hampered, and the injury that that comes to light. Obviously there's a reason why he wasn't able to perform at his normal level. Interesting that there wasn't the option wasn't taken for McStay. But yeah, the question is always how do you regenerate, and how do you find new? I think Elliott won't want to leave, and I don't think Collingwood would want to lose him either. I think that he would definitely be one that they might sharpen the pencil with to keep. The Gold Coast connection is his brothers, up in North Queensland, so that it's a little bit closer to family, and he is a very strong family man, like has really strong connections to his bloodline, so that he would love to be around them, and that's probably been a narrative that's been around quite a bit, and it might come from his management, but he spends a lot of the off season up there. He wouldn't want to go. I think they'll go back to the well and they'll keep him.
Will they be in contention next year?
Yes. Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I think we talk about. I heard Kane and Kingy talking this morning around sort of Braden Maynard's 29 and De Goey's getting on, and I don't think we can say 28, 29 and think getting on anymore. Aren't we blowing that away?
Yeah. In the modern era, you're coming into your peak at that stage. You've got to be. It's really the players who are 32, 33, 34 that are your tipping point. But I think your point right from the start is they haven't either felt they've needed to or haven't trusted their young players. So they don't have that core of players who had played fewer than 50 games.
Correct.
They've always been the ones in and out. They're going to have to commit to those young players, and then
what's the
they
balance?
Have to be players, don't they?
It's a balance of that. Yes, they need to find them, and so Hayes had come through, didn't look quite there. As I said, Harrison injured, Sullivan injured, Allen. Whether he is an ongoing concern or not, like he's shown that he's got high work rate. I think Parker's a legitimate yes. Like he's going to be really good. Demetrio we haven't seen come through yet. Obviously you miss Bobby Hill, and he had issues through the year. Mitchell and Hoskin Elliott Hoskin Elliott's already turned out. Long and Steele are fines in some shape or form. Steele looked good when he came into the team. But they wouldn't have been. I remember he coming in, Houston and Perryman over the off season. I think Perryman had his moments. He looked really good through the third quarter, held up for a period, and was a really strong element of Collingwood's play there when they had their backs against the wall. You wouldn't have been disappointed when it went Membry, Schultz, Membry, Houston in succession for the 4 goals in the second quarter. That looked pretty good. But when you don't get the results, when you get to the pointy end and you don't salute and you don't take those last couple of steps, it's probably people will go and say, well, it's the wrong strategy. But they put themselves in the mix. I don't think for PFI. I think PFI is actually being able to get to the prelims, which is solid enough. Geelong have shown it can be hard to convert at times. But yeah, there's got to be some courage shown at list management and connection from the coaches and list managers to know exactly what these moves are going to be, because there needs to be 3, 4, 5 young players blooded in the next 12 to 24 months for Collingwood to stay as competitive as they have been. And that's what the best sides have been able to do continually. And Collingwood haven't had to do that for quite a while due to their really stable base in their locker room. But yeah, the young talent needs to come, and it needs to come now.
So in 1 year, they're out in the semi-final, and the next year, they're out in the preliminary final. Will Hawthorn's progress continue?
You'd have to assume that it will. They're on the absolute right trajectory, and they have a group that has improved. In the last 12 months, they've improved, and they were the best team in the competition going into the finals in 2024. So they've been able to go one better. They didn't quite have and the midfield will be the question mark, and they will look to add to that. And we've already heard rumours of Merritt coming into that mix, and a left-footed skillful user who can play through the middle. That sounds very Hawthorn, doesn't it?
It does.
But yeah, I think they've been able to make a lot of what they hit the park with, given their lack of depth through the middle of the ground. And Will Day definitely hurts. There's no guarantees, coming off feet, so you sort of hope that he's up and about. But their keys look young. Their back line looks really strong. Their small forwards, their hurt factor's high. It's a real credit to what Geelong were able to do to Hawthorn to close them down. They had that skinny surge sort of offense going in the first quarter, and Blitzavs had set up as the ruckman to stay in the centre square and not allow Hawthorn to come through the centre square, and maybe to handle whatever switching they did, so that you always had that extra number that wasn't caught skinny, and he was always going to be able to get out to fat side and watch the outnumber on fat side. But at quarter time, Geelong made the adjustment and pulled Blitzavs back skinny, and they defended skinnier and were prepared to stop Hawthorn getting that surge along the skinny side. And as soon as they closed that avenue down, Hawthorn didn't quite have the ability to get any field position from their transition, and couldn't get any field position from stoppage because they were smashed in that element. Geelong sort of held them at bay beyond that.
So there were three phases to Hawthorn, I felt. One was the tactical planning, which we know Sam Mitchell intellectually is one of the best coaches in the comp. I felt like we saw that early. Third quarter, I reckon they showed their quality. They were about to get completely run over, and they made their stand to just claw back for, 15 minutes?
Yep.
And in the last quarter, he threw everything everywhere, which spoke of a willingness of what he is prepared to do. And everyone was in different position, and that worked for a 10-minute block as well. So I do leave feeling like they are ever so close.
I think that an element to that underpins all of those is their ability to do the basics really well. I think that they seem to be a team that must spend an exorbitant amount of time on the basics. Just the ground level, they're finding the 2v1s and being able to put a teammate in a space. They're tackling and grappling, whether it's ball in hand to get through or whether it's the tackler to stop. I think their body positioning to be able to get back to ball, whether it's to intercept mark or to spoil, they do the basics of the game really well. They're kicking. They do the basics of the game really well. I think they must recruit around it. They must drill it, and the foundations are really sound. So anyone that's going to come into that environment is going to maximise their opportunities. And if you have talents that can add to the mix, well then you will be a part of a unit that's going to be brought together to play really solid team football. You need to be an exceptional team to be able to get on top of a team that's prepared and performs in that manner, and that's exactly what Geelong had to do. I think you can't underestimate the expectation that Hawthorn carried into this year, and still a relatively young group, a young group in terms of how they've come together with the shared experience. They added a couple to the mix this year behind the ball. They both look really good. I don't think there's any reason why they can't be not exponentially better, but their growth can still take another step jump. They can move into the Geelong-Brisbane conversation of the last couple of years because they've stood up against pretty much every side. They just fell short on the weekend.
The best bit, that was Patrick Dangerfield's game. So I wanted just to get your insight as a player who could shape the game by pure force of will as well as everything else they've got. What do you see when you watch a game like that?
Well, he's just been managed so well, hasn't he? And he's had to manage himself so well. Not very few sides, very few teams have got anyone with his attributes, and even less have players that may challenge or quell those attributes. There's not much you can do when you've got 100 kilo. He'd be pushing high 90s. He'd be nearly 100 kilo of absolute ballistic brute force to get from where you are to where the ball is. And he takes a straight line, always has. More centre bounces in the finals, and we'll go again. Potentially Brisbane in Josh Dunkley have got a player, maybe one of the few that have got a player that could potentially quell that in some shape or form. But it's not just the player that's going to be standing shoulder to shoulder or trying to work in front of him or sit on his backside and then go and try and tackle him after. It's actually the ball winners around Josh Dunkley that are going to have to do that as well. So the Ashcrofts, can they get in and out before it's done? Is it Lachie Neale who gets in and gets the ball out before Danger? Because Danger's the second effort is not going to be as strong as the first. But how good's the first? I mean, that was an exceptional game of footy. And then to be able to hit the scoreboard as well, it's if he does that in the granny, it's pretty hard to see them not winning.